then usually there is some kind of an experience that happens to all of us that draws us to art in a therapeutic milieu. I got polio when I was 11 years old, was in the hospital for over 11 months, was totally paralyzed to start out with, and in a sense had to begin my life over again. Being a child at that age, I've always said that was kind of the best age to get it. I already had a fairly strong ego formed. I had very supportive parents, and I had art because I had liked it. It was a natural thing for me to go to that. And on top of that, I came to find out later there was a strong influence in my future career contributed by volunteer artists who were part of a program that came into the homes of kids that were disabled and did art with them. They just did art. They built the relationship with you through the art. So I did ceramics and drawing and photography. They came once a week and gave that to me. I later had an awareness, much later in my work when I was being interviewed, that it was those volunteer artists who built the relationship with me in art and modeled what later came to be the art therapy studio, where the art is the core, the art is the basis for the relationship. I learned then when I was doing a summer job at a rehab hospital while I was in the art school, which is what I was doing. I was going to have a career in art. I met George Streeter, who was the chief of psychiatry, the Freudian analytic psychiatrist. He was the person that came and talked to me about his idea to open an art studio in that hospital. That we kept in touch. His idea being that these patients he knew very well were not candidates for verbal therapy. They needed something else. And it was his vision to provide the space for people to become engaged. At that time in 1967 was the year that we opened the art studio. There were no other training programs like that. Ohio was just starting to kind of take form as a core developer of the profession of art therapy through people like Don Jones, then Bob Alt, then Bernie Stone. Then it was those people who sought me out and to whom I got connected. Then someone told me I was doing art therapy. I had not heard that term. There were no books or articles.
Shortly after my undergraduate days, I found a job at Bellevue Hospital in recreation therapy. And that was the beginning of the whole career. It was recreation work, but I found, and I was very young, but I could intuitively see that something was happening with patients of a substantive nature participating in any form of the arts. It took a few years till I knew I needed and wanted to study this. I think it was 76 that I found the newly formed program at New York University. Was among the first crop of students to graduate from that program and had wonderful training. But again, there was nothing about it to do with work in the medical milieu. So while I had fabulous training, I had to, and I was working and learning at the same time. So it was lovely because I could take what I learned and it informed my work the next day and vice versa. So that was a very nice training experience and life experience at the same time. Even Edith Kramer, who I was honored to have had as a mentor, said I had her for didactic classes and supervisions. She said, I'd present a case and she'd say, okay, we don't know about medical art therapy. Irene will teach us. How daunting is that? The Freud of the art therapy community is looking at me, and I was pretty shy, quiet kid at the time. But stayed the course and learned early on about not only various illnesses and disabilities. As I said, I was very gratified by seeing and feeling responsiveness in patients that I couldn't quite articulate in terms of therapeutic gain and conceptualize well until my training. But it really was something that I stuck to, even when I couldn't find anyone else who was doing medical art therapy. Just really felt very bonded to that environment. I knew it was the road for me. And
it was pretty obvious that what they needed. If you could put the brush in a patient's mouth, then teach them how to paint with the brush in their mouth, they can figure out, well, maybe I can use a computer. Maybe I can do other things this way. And just having the ability to put a mark on paper, I saw the look on people's faces. From that mark, I could show them how to draw a square. They got what they needed. It wasn't helping to talk about why they were depressed. What helped is giving them something that they could do to get out of that depression themselves. You put the control in their hands or in their mouth in that respect. In setting up the room, that it be an art studio in the hospital, that it would be clinically different. It would say nothing about what, like the OT department or physical therapy or the other clinical departments, that patients would not be required to come. We worked hard as the art therapist and my volunteer staff to encourage patients to come, to promote the program, to do demonstrations of art by ourselves. And they could just come and sit. They could join on other levels. They could be the supporters or cheer on other patients. So everybody had a way that they could come in, and they weren't, again, threatened in any way. I always took a sketchbook to the room with some markers or to identify, even if I wasn't going to use it, to identify myself from the beginning as an art therapist. So that's where it's a common, normal, healthy space. It's not really related to whatever the issue for pathology is.
I think to realize that the work inherently, particularly this version of the work, probably is going to include short-term, maybe shorter term than one expected, maybe less work and briefer time. And to know, this is what I'd want to pass on, to know that the smallest movement, whether it's a drawing, whether it's a line, whether it's words, whether it's facial expression, is really quite an important gain for that person in that very intimate time. And to hold on to that. So that I think, just to summarize, there may be small gains, brief periods, but for me, everlasting reward.
From Dr. Streeter, which for me always kind of summarizes the art part, that art offers uncontaminated opportunity for being yourself, for revealing your identity as a person. The world of art therapy offers patients a chance to be, that utilizes the broader spectrum of choices than words alone make available. And that, I think, always, to me, talks about why art, in that.
So I think if we convey our language, the substantive nature of the work, and tie that to what matters to an administrator, then we're really putting ourselves on the map in terms of being integral in the team and a really important component of patient care.
I know Tracy had asked, how do you convince the skeptical administrators or the physicians? And it's much based on what Irene just talked about. You show them. You get connected to one of their patients or a unit or the program that's just starting, and you show the effectiveness of art therapy by doing it with the individuals with whom that they work, and in the measurable ways that Irene talked about.
On the positive side, what I learned early on about patients with brain impairments, whether caused by stroke or external traumatic brain injury, acquired brain injury, what have you, is that when patients were inattentive and agitated, disengaged in other forms of therapy, they were, voila, surprisingly attentive and engaged in the art making. It wasn't task oriented, it wasn't physical therapy, aiming to raise your upper arm a few more degrees. It was carte blanche. There might have been a directive here and there, but basically it was of personal interest and personal meaning. So that was an aha moment, and ended up being the direction I went in studying cognitive impairment, and how art can hopefully, I think, be a form of cognitive remediation. What I was seeing was, well, this can not only be effective for the patient, and later studied that more fully, but again, also it can inform caregivers to see, look at the difference here in this discipline. But also, and what we noted happened was that strength building was then generalized to other forms of therapy.
We do live in an environment, all of us, that is constantly changing and changes how we work with people. And if I look at the art therapy studio where I worked, it went from working with patients for 9 months or 3 months because they were hospitalized that long in rehab, that you can build a relationship with them that's very concrete in the sense that you actually do have the time with them, all the way to now where you're lucky to see a person once or twice in a 1 week stay, or even people with a severe problem like a stroke, maybe you're there with them 3 weeks. Then they have intensive therapy, so you don't have them as long. So we then responded and started developing and opening community-based programs, because people, even at the time when they were in the hospital for a long time, wanted something afterwards. They had had a stroke, they couldn't go to an art class in continuing education because of the special needs they had. So they needed an art therapy studio, or a studio for a class that took that into account. So we changed the focus to a certain degree, then put more art therapists in our community-based programs and started them in different parts of the city. So you can adjust and change. You need to in order to survive and to keep on serving